Welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. If you haven't heard the terms blended learning or flipped classrooms before the COVID pandemic, chances are you've heard it since. But what does that really mean? My guest today is Heather Staker, universally known among educators as one of the country's foremost thinkers on blended learning and technology in education, and the author of Blended, Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve Schools. She's a researcher, author, and I could tell you from personal experience that she's a teacher at heart. So I'm grateful she's taking the time to join me today via Zoom. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, Tom.
I'm so glad that you were able to make time for me. I know your schedule is as busy as mine is, and it's kind of great. And where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Dripping Springs, Texas, so right outside of Austin.
Great. And so before we dive into all things blended, how did you get to where you are? What led you to your work in blended learning and in education in general?
I became passionate about just thinking about schools and improving schools way back when I was 17 years old. And Governor Pete Wilson in California appointed me to be the lone student member on the California State Board of Education. And so I spent about a week each month flying to Sacramento, staying in a Hyatt hotel by myself, and attending State Board of Education meetings and events with full voting rights. It's an unusual feature in the California public education system. And that early exposure to schools across the state of California gave me a heart for my peers. I saw students that were incarcerated. I saw them in all sorts of schools, urban and rural, small and huge. And I also saw the bureaucracy that governs the big state of California education system. And I left feeling somewhat chagrined that I didn't have really the skills to be able to change the system at the time. If anything, I just tried to keep my head above the water and vote according to how some of the people on the board who I respected were voting, because I just didn't have the expertise to really change the system. But then I went on to pursue an MBA at Harvard Business School and continued my passion for just thinking about how do you create systemic change and innovation that can actually move how systems work. And I've really been involved in education ever since. I worked for the Clayton Institute for Disruptive Innovation with a lens for how do we take principles of innovation that have been successful in other organizations and companies and bring them to the social sector, so that we can innovate more successfully in healthcare, education, poverty relief, some of the problems that have vexed our society for a long time. How do we bring our best innovative selves to bear with those problems?
Now, the title of your book includes the word disruptive, and that has a couple different connotations. When you talk about disruption in education, what does that mean to you?
Clayton Christensen is widely regarded as the father of innovation theory. And from his perch at Harvard Business School, he identified that there are different types of innovation. And that as you can recognize the patterns and say, this is a disruptive innovation, or this is more of a sustaining innovation, that then you can follow the playbook pursuant to those patterns. So when he coined the term disruptive innovation, he was really talking about any phenomenon where there's a complicated, messy, unaffordable system, and a new technology comes in that shifts the playing field so that there's a simpler, easier, more affordable solution. And oftentimes it pushes access out to the common man. So an example would be TurboTax, where before wealthy people could perhaps pay for an expensive CPA to process their taxes for them. But when TurboTax came about, then for whatever it was, $25, the common person could subscribe to a wizard that would help them process their taxes and file with the IRS. And we've seen that similar disruptive innovation in almost every sector of society. As you see a sector transform to being simpler, more convenient, more accessible, it's those disruptive enablers that come in, push access out to the people without as much wealth and expertise, and allow them to participate in a market that wasn't accessible to them before. One of the big observations that the Christensen Institute made back in the day, and this is really when the Institute was born, was when Clayton Christensen and Michael Horn and Curtis Johnson wrote a book called Disrupting Class, which identified that online learning was following many of the patterns of a disruptive innovation. So it was following that playbook. And that as such, it was poised to change the way that the world learns. Now, this was a long time ago. This was in 2008. We fast forward now and we think that was quite prescient, that in fact, online learning has done a lot to change the way that the world is learning right now.
One of the things, as somebody who's been involved in instructional technology since the early 90s, I think often we think, oh, we have this new box or this new device, and this is going to change everything. And what I like about your work and what I like about the book Blended is that it's not about this technology over that technology. And so let's kind of define what blended learning is and how it's different than a lot of models of what was coming before it in terms of how we use technology in the classroom.
Sure. So when the book Disrupting Class came out in 2008, it identified that online learning was poised to change the way the world learns, but the mechanism for how that would actually happen was still undefined. I then joined the Institute and started doing case studies about schools that were starting to use online learning as part of their brick and mortar experience. And we were interested in that because prior to 2010, 2011, most of the time when educators talked about online learning, they were talking about distance learning. In fact, those terms were sort of synonymous, distance learning and online learning, you remember. And that was because mostly you thought of online learning as being something that was done from home or in your spare time, not as part of your brick and mortar classroom experience. When I came aboard, we started observing that schools were using the term as part of a brick and mortar experience. And they were then calling it blended learning or hybrid learning. And so to understand that better, I engaged in a research project with some collaborators to really look at how were schools using that term blended learning and what were the models that were arising. And so back in the day, we published a report called Classifying K-12 Blended Learning. And it proposed that when most educators use the term blended learning, and this was the case back then as well, what they meant was online learning. So where students have some control of the time, place, path, or pace of their learning because they're doing it online, combined with brick and mortar schooling. So online learning that used to happen at distance was marching into that brick and mortar school and somehow being part of that student's experience who was enrolled in a brick and mortar school. And then the third part of the definition was that those modalities were integrated, meaning that if a student was doing online learning, maybe in the library or from home or in the media center for part of the day, and then back in math class with a face-to-face teacher for part of math instruction, that there would be data that would connect those two so that it was an integrated learning experience for that student. So that seemed to characterize what the field meant when they said blended learning. And then from there, we were able to identify prominent models of blended learning that were emerging in the K-12 space. So rotation models like flipped classroom and station rotation, flex models like were happening in credit recovery labs and then growing into micro schools, a la carte models where students were taking a fully online course, and then enriched virtual models where students were learning online and then coming to a learning center or coming to school maybe 2 days a week, 2 days a month. And so we started to identify that taxonomy that hopefully brought some clarity to what we meant and what it looked like on the ground when educators said we're doing blended learning. How did that actually appear in a classroom?
Right. And there's a lot of talk about how it can be more efficient for teachers because they can use their time to really help the students if they're learning a lot of the material either in the classroom on a computer or back at home. I know that for many of the parents watching, their first exposure to online learning happened last year in crisis mode. And I think that has colored perception of what good use of technology in education can be. What did you see, from your perch looking at what was going on beginning in March of 2020 when kind of everything went online?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I want to go back to your first observation that it can be
Sure.
more efficient for teachers. And just the reason I want to go back to that is that one of the common problems that we see is that teachers can feel replaced by computers. They can feel like the instructional job has been delegated to a computer and the students working online with Khan Academy or Dreambox or whichever their software program that they're using. And so then the teacher doesn't know what their role is. And I want to emphasize that in the best implementations, that teacher role is elevated, not replaced. And the teacher shifts to one-on-one mentoring and coaching and curating projects and leading group discussions. And there are a number of higher level activities the teacher can be pursuing to bring richness to the student's life, even while delegating some of the instructional job to the computer. So that's really critical. And I'm glad that you mentioned that if potential efficiency, it's only there if the system seizes it and redeploys teachers for that really human role of connecting with students, of meeting with them individually and working with them. So then that brings us to the pandemic and what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. And really what we saw was schools scrambling. There's no one answer I can give you for this is what happened. And everyone knows this, we've all lived through this together, but some schools were handing out worksheets. Some schools were doing nothing. Some schools really had already deployed a learning management system and they were already telling their parents and students to log on to Canvas or go to Google Classroom or whatever it's learning, whatever your learning management system might be. And so there was such a potpourri of what schools were doing to accommodate an unexpected and difficult circumstance. And to be truthful, fast forward now a couple of years, and we're still just barely emerging from what I would characterize as trauma from that. We can't look back on these past 2 years and say that was classic online learning, because really what it was emergency instructional cobbling together, if that's a term.
Right, sure. And yeah, and I think, when I hear, I've heard, that was emergency teaching. I'm like, I think in a lot of ways we're, depending on the readiness of the school division or the teacher, I think, I'm not sure that we've emerged from emergency teaching yet. How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, I've just started to notice that my phone's ringing more with schools saying, let's do another workshop. Let's do some more professional development. So they're just starting to get back in the mode of some of the routines that helped them flourish in the past, like professional development and staff days to focus on something other than emergency coordination. So we're starting to see that happening, but it's just beginning right now.
And your business, which, and I don't know a lot about your business, but I have been to your training in Austin, and it was an amazing experience for me. I'm assuming that your business was greatly affected by what went on in the last year and a half.
Well, I think so many people have been greatly affected, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
What I saw in the education world was that really pursuing traditional professional development, even around blended learning, even when folks wanted expertise around online learning, they needed it in such bite-sized, just-in-time modules that the workshops I had been doing in the past weren't as relevant. And so I quickly pivoted and created micro-credentials. I partnered with Bloomboard and said, here, teachers, if you want to know just how to help identify student needs when students are learning remotely, here's a module on that. Or how to develop 1 week schedule of blended learning where some students are home, some students are at school or in between. How do you do that? And so what we saw was the development of PD around targeted specific competencies that the teachers needed just in time. And in some ways, this was a gain for the industry, that the workshop model that we've used in the past, although it still has its place, isn't as efficient as when teachers can identify, this is the competency I need right now. And it's not you, school district, telling me to go to this workshop. It's me asking to please teach me this so that I can do my job more easily. So I do think that the pandemic helped create some nimbleness around giving PDF opportunities to teachers that were more the right lesson at the right time in the right way for those teachers. And that's a gain.
Right. And, I've used this analogy before, but it's like the difference between when my refrigerator's broken and I want to replace a part, I Google that and I go and I watch that video and I learn how to fix that part. I don't go to school to learn how to repair a refrigerator, as much as that might be great to do as well. Can you describe for us what, and I know this is you've got a whole book and a whole body of work around this, but when you see really good blended learning in a classroom, and I know there's many examples, so maybe just pick a couple of them, but what does that look like to you? If you walk into a classroom that, and you recognize this is really excellent, and this is what I'm talking about.
I'd like to propose a few new metrics. I think we've gotten really stuck on our state standardized test metrics and just map testing and that kind of data, but there are a few other metrics that really mean a lot to me. One of them is, how often is a student stuck? So if they are having the opportunity to direct some of their own learning, maybe they're at a station, maybe they have access to a computer, how often are they sitting there stuck because they don't know what to do? I would love to capture that metric. Another metric I love is how much agency is in this classroom. Would you consider this to be a high agency classroom? And what I mean by that is how much prerogative is given to students to direct their own learning, to work collaboratively with their peers to manage their own journey. That is a metric for this century that matters a lot for the well-being of these students over time. And yet we still go into classrooms, and particularly classrooms in higher needs environments, where the mentality is, we'll do whatever it takes to get the student into college, even if they have to sit there and we cram it into them. And I know the intention is good, but what I see is a disparity where oftentimes the students who are more privileged have higher agency environments. And we need to advocate for all students to have that more entrepreneurial, own your mission environment. And then the third metric that matters a lot to me is, our teachers giving individual students radically frequent one-on-one feedback? How much individual feedback is that student getting? There is ample research to show that in outside organizations, employees flourish when they get radically frequent feedback from their bosses. And yet in our classrooms, as we try to cultivate higher performing, happier classroom environments, we underutilize the benefit of one-on-one feedback. So as a teacher's time is freed up, so imagine a student has gone to school, maybe they're doing some of their learning through an excellent instructor who happens to be online, or a well-packaged software application. What is that face-to-face teacher doing? And one of the very best things that they can do, and the research bears this out, is meet individually with each student to give them frequent, radical, positive feedback and growth feedback, but feedback that's well designed to help those students grow. It's radically helpful. And especially in this moment when a lot of students are craving more connection, whether they're at home or at school, teachers can be meeting with them like you and I are meeting right now, to have those human connections and to show those students that someone cares about them. Someone's watching their performance. Someone's helping them identify new habits and helping them get unstuck. It's the most important shift that schools can make right now.
I'm sure you do have thoughts about, because you are a trainer and you have gone into schools and had people come to you for training, how do you make sure the person knows that what you're trying to help them with, it's not just one more thing they have to do, but this is how can the blended learning approach and how can what you have to offer really kind of change a teacher's life for the better?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I've been thinking a lot recently is about listening to teachers. That there's the school of thought where school districts require professional development for teachers. But I prefer the school of thought of listening to teachers and what are the problems that they're facing, and then developing solutions that help them make progress. That seems to be the easiest win for everyone. And right now, there are so many new skills that teachers want around how do they curate lessons for their learning management system, or I'm having a hard time doing a one-on-one check-in with this student who I consider to be a very difficult student to work with. What should I do? And teachers want those tips. They really want their jobs to be more fulfilling and successful. They want to reach and connect each student. And so I think a lot of it is listening and then helping be the liaison that connects teachers to the innovations that are bubbling up in other places.
I'm noticing, as you know, as a man in my 50s, that as I work with younger people and who have grown up with technology, digital natives, if you want to use that term, that I'm just really impressed. And as you work with young teachers, and I know many of our older colleagues are amazing with technology, but are you noticing any kind of like shift when it comes to that it's just a normal part of their lives because they grew up experiencing it all the time?
I'm not sure I can comment on like research that's bulletproof around like age and its correlation to readiness for innovation. But I can point to some research from the Christensen Institute that Thomas Arnett pioneered recently called The Teacher's Quest for Progress, where he identified what are the different reasons why teachers might want to embrace these new models for learning. And he identified 4. One is that they want to lead the way in their schools. The second is that they feel like the instructional model is broken, and more teachers are feeling that way right now as a result of the pandemic. The third is that they just want to reach and connect with their students in their classroom better. They really have a heart for those students, and they feel like they're not making headway with some of them. And then the fourth is that they're being forced to. And one of the points of this research was, how do we help identify ways to bring teachers who are in that fourth category into one of the first 3, so that they have an appetite for some of the innovations that really could help fix the brokenness in the models and reach and connect with students better.
I think that's a great point. And I think, the blend in training of that face-to-face and online is also really important, right? So we're gonna send you to watch this set of videos online, and complete this course or whatever. But I think we still require mentorship. Everybody does, right? In order to learn. So in your own training, how has that become an important part of what you all do?
Well, that's one of the reasons I was attracted to micro-credentials. I think it's a pretty cool vehicle right now.
Can you explain what that is for
Sure.
for people who might not know?
Sure. The idea is that, so if you want to become a pharmacist, you could receive a license for that. If you want to become an expert in any number of other fields, there's specific licenses that help you. We have that in education, but they tend to be pretty monolithic. So you're just granted a certificate as an educator. And the idea is to modularize those credentials so that they're more specific and defined and verifiable and predictable. So a superintendent could say, I want a teacher who's really good at 3rd grade ELA small group instruction, who also has a specialty in helping students that are on the autism spectrum, and could predictably hire someone with those micro credentials that has those areas of expertise. And so it wouldn't be such a monolithic credential, but it's broken down more according to specific areas of expertise. So they'd be quicker to earn, and they're predictable for whoever's doing the hiring.
So more like a merit badge and less like another graduate degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see the same thing happening for K-12 students, right? This idea of more of a competency-based system where students earn the equivalent of a badge or something to show that they've mastered specific skills, or competencies. And education can do the same thing for teachers. It just is a more satisfying way for teachers to pursue professional growth and advancement, and give them areas of excellence that they can pursue in bite-sized pieces, job embedded. Anyway, I just think there's a lot of features of this vehicle for PD that's emerging that are innovative and really disruptive to the system. And so that's been where my heart is. And I partnered with Bloomboard partly because they offer coaches and mentors that walk alongside the teacher as they're earning the micro credential. So it's very much a mirror of what you'd see in a classroom, where the students pursuing their own pathway and their personalized learning plan, and they have a teacher who's walking alongside them. And teachers, and really anyone, needs that same support as they're pursuing their goals. the trusted guide at their side. And that's what I think is the future of professional development.
And then I can also see that being really helpful if you are a school administrator, a principal, assistant principal, and you want people that have a broad range of skills, so you can look at your spreadsheet and say, oh, this person understands this concept and this one understands this one. And so it makes it easier to kind of fit them all together. We're down to just our last little bit here. And I just want to ask you, and we've got a minute or so, but is now a good time to become a teacher? And what do you say to somebody who's thinking about being a teacher right now?
I think right now is a wonderful time to become a teacher. It's a wonderful time to become a teacher. And the reason why is that, yes, our students have complicated lives. The world has become more complex. It's bustling, it's noisy, it's moving. There's commotion in many people's lives. But meanwhile, we have innovations that are rising up to help us meet the moment. And so I'm optimistic for our country and for our world. The fact that there are ways for students to access information in a variety of different venues while freeing up teachers' time to mentor and support them is phenomenal. It's a wonderful time, particularly for teachers who either want to curate that content and post it, or who want to be that human connection. Either of those roles are in great demand in the future.
Well, thank you for helping us end on a positive note. A lot of times now we're not being positive when we're talking about education, so I thank you for that. And if nothing else, I hope today's episode has our audience rethinking what blended learning is and what it can be. I'd like to thank Heather Staker for taking the time out of her very busy schedule to join us. If you'd like to learn more, I hope you'll visit her website at readytoblend.com. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.